unsuspecting city, history's greatest experiment creates tomorrow's greatest superhero. Spider-Man, the movie. A live-action spectacular directed by Joe Zito, based on the characters created by Stan Lee.
Spider-Man was picked up, the rights were picked up by Canon when they were in full flower in the early 80s. And Marvel had terrible luck trying to sell any of their characters. They had a brief, semi-successful deal for a couple of years in the 70s. The Incredible Hulk was a hit, and The Amazing Spider-Man on television. It lasted for a couple of seasons and then just kind of went away. But that was pretty much it. And they were going through hard times in the early 80s. Comic book sales were off all over. Superman 3, an awful sequel to the first two, did not make anywhere near the money they thought they were going to make with it, which was kind of silly. You could have seen that from the get-go. At any rate, so Canon picked the rights of Spider-Man and Captain America up fairly cheaply, a couple $100,000 or $250,000 or something, to be spread out over several years. And that's how they got to the point of hiring a writer named Leslie Stevens, who was an accomplished screenwriter and playwright, whose main claim to fame that we know is the TV series The Outer Limits. He and Joe Stefano co-created that, and it's absolutely marvelous, scary, thought-provoking, great drama, and so on. So you'd think that'd be a cool match. Take this incredibly popular science fiction / action comic book hero and stick it in the hands of a writer who made one of the best science fiction TV shows in the world. Well, that can't possibly lose, can it? What that doesn't take into mind is Menachem Golan, who, with Yoram Globus, was the head of Canon and was in fact a filmmaker himself, and he fancied his ideas were a lot better than everybody else's. Neither of them grew up with Spider-Man or any of the Marvel characters. Menachem was about 10 years older than I am, and at that time in the 30s, in the 80s, I was about 30. So I grew up with the stuff. Menachem didn't. I think they had Superman in Israel, but I don't think any of that, the Marvel stuff, wouldn't have been there when he was a kid and growing up. So he had no idea what it was. He thought it was some kind of ninja thing. So this guy turns into this monster spider ninja and goes around doing ninja things. And that's what Leslie Stevens ended up writing. As good a writer as anybody is, if the boss says, I want you to write a story about a romantic eggplant, that's what you do. You don't say, well, we might want to make him human being. No. I want eggplant. Eggplant is beautiful. It tastes wonderful with butter. Make eggplant. Well, what are you going to do? You can either tell him, jam it up your butt, or you can say, okay, I'm going to do the best eggplant script anybody's ever done, which is pretty much what Leslie Stevens did with Spider-Man.
Originally, the story was about about Peter Parker, who works for the scientist's company, who takes photos for ID badges, which the scientist turns him into a 8-armed human, hairy, suicidal human tarantula, which, contemplating suicide by his unspeakable form, the scientist sends his mutants that were in his basement, a full collection of mutants in his basement, to kill him, but Peter would defeat one by another. And I remember that in this document it says the scientist sends a semi-seductive female character.
Yeah, that could be. I read that thing a couple of years after we did our work. A friend of mine at Canon got me a copy. I think I either gave it back to him or just laughed and threw it away. It was amazingly off. It wasn't, oddly enough, it bore a similarity to an idea that Nigel Neal was writing at Universal roughly around the same time, a couple years earlier, on a remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon. The whole idea was a secondary race of mutants. In his case, they're throwbacks. It's the creature and the creature and the Yeti and all these other things. They're all kept in this vast underground thing for some nefarious reason. In this one, the mad doctor, Dr. Zlockalopoulos, or whatever the hell his name was, the head of the company, he wanted to create a new master race of, I don't know, glob creatures and Spider-Men and whatever. That's, okay, if you're going to be a mad scientist who wants to conquer the world, that's not a bad path to take. But it wasn't really Spider-Man. That megalomaniacal idea of creating a new race, super race of mutants and so forth, it's a semi-X-Men idea. It also crops up much later in the Spider-Man saga, becoming one of the things of the so-called James Cameron treatment.
And I remember that Toby Hooper, which his name was attached on the poster, which of course was the Spider-Man in space.
Yeah, it's tough to say without talking to him what exactly his association was. He was under a 3-picture contract to Canon at the time, and he had this, a marvelous reputation from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know that anybody at Canon ever actually asked him to do the movie. His name was supposed to.
No, they did.
Yeah, they did. Oh, okay, Scott, go ahead.
He was originally slated to direct the picture. He was the absolute go-to guy. But he had some other projects he wanted to do first, one of which was Life Force, and the other was, of course, the Mars one.
Invaders from Mars.
Invaders from Mars, which I should know because I tried to meet him, so I auditioned for it and actually got a part on it.
Cool.
But yeah, there was that whole setup to where he was the go-to guy. But from my understanding from his assistant, he wasn't that enthusiastic about the project.
Oh, that's a pity. He should have read the script. We tossed in a couple of things I think he would have liked.
I don't think he ever ended up reading the script at all.
I doubt it. Yeah. At any rate, he was considered the director, obviously, and now we've got a verification of that. But by the time John Brancato and I were hired, and we started in on the treatment, Joe Zito entered the picture.
Now, Joe asked for the project.
Yes.
Joe was a huge Spider-Man fan. And he stopped Menachem Golem, this is what Joe told me, in the elevator, and specifically asked about Spider-Man, and Menachem said, well, if you want Spider-Man, you can have Spider-Man. It was that simple.
Well, I wish it had been that simple for us. We, John and I had just started writing as a screenwriting team a year or so before, and we had our agent had gotten us into Marvel, and we did an adaptation of Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos. Stan Lee liked it, and through him we got Marvel's agent to represent us, and so Stan Lee had us in. We chatted. We can talk about Stan a bit because we both interacted with him, which is fun. But the three of us are sitting in this atrium at Marvel, smoking cigars, just kicking back. And Stan said, okay, well, you did a good job on Sergeant Fury. That was all right. That was very good. Okay, now, we got all these characters here at Marvel. We got the Incredible Hulk. We got the Mighty Thor. What do you guys want to do? And both of us, together, both said, Spider-Man. Oh, God, yeah, I'd love to have you guys take a crack at it, but Canon's got it. They don't listen to me. They're doing whatever I tell them what's wrong, and it doesn't work out. But we got all these great characters here. We got Fantastic Four. We got Ant-Man. So what do you guys want to do? And absolutely together, we said, Spider-Man. I'll talk to him. I don't know. But through Stan and through Don Koploff, we went in and pitched ourselves to write it. And our pitch, such as it was they said, well, what do you want to do with the character? And we said, do the comic book. No adaptation of Spider-Man to that point had ever used the elements that are there in the comic book. It's not just action and a guy sailing around from building to building and punching guys. It's wisecracks. It's soap opera. It's a guy in Joe Zito's words, a guy who can't get laid. It's all of those things. Use all of those things that, we care about Peter because he's such a schlub. If there's a mistake to be made, he makes it. And he ends up, alone and walking home at night. Spider-Man, on the other hand, is everything Peter is not in his real life. It's like the mirror image of Superman. Superman is the guy. I mean, he's the greatest hero in the world, and he disguises himself as a mild-mannered schlub. Peter is, and he in his disguise, he's the most fantastic superhero in New York City. Anyway, so that apparently appealed to them, and we went to work. Joined the Writers Guild, which was great. That was a landmark, and came up with a treatment. Now, at this time, Tobe Hooper was still considered the director. I walked by him in the hallway once. I was going to say hi, but who am I? I mean, he was a director, and I was just a writer. But I saw him anyway. And we put in some touches into the script that I thought would appeal to him. A reference to the movie Dr. Cyclops. One of the characters was named Dr. Thorkel, which is Dr. Cyclops' name. And some horrific imagery, actually rather Cronenberg-esque imagery, when this terrible cyclotron accident happens. That was my idea, and intentionally there, because of Tobe Hooper's record with horrific imagery in his films. Anyway, we turned it in, and they said, fine, but you've got a new director. This is Joe Zito, and that gets us up to. And so Joe, in his own way, fought for it as much as I didn't have to fight too much, obviously. But in fact, that's about the only time I interacted with Menachem Golan, too. I rode down in the elevator with him, and I said, I hear you like the script. And he says, yeah, it's a good script. A lot of business evidently went on in that elevator.
Stanley's 2-page treatment. It basically had when the tentacles, or I should say Waldo's, mutilated into his back, there's a dialogue he says that he would become the greatest master criminal in the world. And and also he creates a anti-gravity ray.
Yeah, well, Stan's outline was pretty basic, and it was like really comic booky. One should not expect anything different, really. But we didn't particularly want to deal with things like that. First thing we asked, by the way, was, can we kill off Aunt May? Because both of us just thought that was the biggest pain in the ass in that comic book. Let's kill her off. It's terrible. Oh, Peter's very upset, and we can keep coming back to it, but she's boring. Let's get rid of her. You can't kill off Aunt May. Everybody loves Aunt May. Oh, no, okay. But yeah, his outline, he wanted to do a Dr. Octopus story. But we argued that if you're going to do a first Spider-Man movie, then do the Green Goblin. I mean, that's the greatest Spider-Man villain in Spider-Man history. No, I want to do Dr. Octopus. Okay, so we did that. We made some changes. John's a brilliant guy. He came up with a couple of scientific angles, which were fun and still within the parameters that Stan wanted in the story. Instead of searching for the secret of anti-gravity, which is, it's just kind of like a kids show in the 50s. Oh, it's an anti-gravity thing. Look, that bottle is floating. Since Octopus was supposed to be a scientist, John came up with the idea that Octopus Octavius was trying to figure out proof of the hypothetical fifth force, the cosmic glue that holds the entire universe together. I forget what the other. There's gravity, something or other, the strong force and the weak force. Those are the four known forces. And then there is a hypothetical fifth force, which is essentially cosmic glue, the thing that keeps the entire universe revolving. And that was Octavius's goal in all these big atomic experiments in this university nuclear reactor. And we kept that consistent. The transformation that Stan indicated in his short outline it's a comic book transformation. The guy goes through this horrific accident. He's got these David Cronenberg-esque things or Giger-esque things going on. He's now half machine, half human. He's got wires inside with his veins and arteries and muscles. And so he decides to become the greatest master criminal in the world. Well, oh, come on. People don't do that when they have a traumatic accident. They may become bitter or they may change the direction of their life, but they don't say, I'm going to become the world's greatest Al Capone. That's just, it's comic booky. So we just simplified it and kept Octavius's goals the same. He still wants to prove his theory. And that's the only thing that he wants now. He's monomaniacal about it. He is insane because he lets nothing else affect him. He doesn't care who he hurts along the way. He's going to find the truth of this thing. And that to me was a lot scarier than a guy deciding he wanted to be, Lex Luthor. Anyway, so that's where our take on that was. We met with Joe Zito just once, and I was very pleased that he was as enthusiastic as he was about the project. He said he's made a whole lot of films, a whole lot of realistic films in a comic book way. Now he wants to make a comic book movie in a real way, which I thought was a pretty cool attitude. Beyond that, I didn't really understand what his suggestions were, which were so vague as to be kind of incomprehensible. He said, I want there to be magic on every page. Well, what do you mean? What's magic? Is it clever dialogue, or is it an action scene that you weren't expecting, or a really good smart crack after a fight, or what is it? Well, magic on every page. So that really wasn't much help in forming things. Hey, Scott,
Yeah.
Did you interact with Joe during that time at all?
Yeah, I interacted with Joe a lot. We had a lot of discussions. I brought him tons of Spider-Man comics, kind of give him some research. I had a collection of Spider-Man. It was all bound.
Wow.
I got that idea from Marvel when I was over at Marvel. They had their entire library in these binders, and I had a bunch of comics that weren't mint condition, and I had them bound. So I had from Amazing Fantasy 15 all the way up to whatever the latest Spider-Man was in 1987.
Good Lord.
So basically, I lent him a couple of things, and we did a lot of discussions.
Cool. Now, I just recently learned through Twig, because he posted a page of it, that you did a Spider-Man script around that time. What was the deal on that?
Yeah, Joe Zito had talked to me, and there had been so much hubbub going on, some of it from Stan, some of it from Menachem, and I think they kept switching writers around. And Joe's idea was that it went from good to okay to bad to worse. And it was really, really off scale. And the movie had been put on hold for whatever reason. And they were also looking at, I believe they were looking at a studio in Italy instead of shooting it the way they wanted to. And I had a friend that was a huge comic fan. And we decided to stay away from Stan or anyone else. Because I know Stan had a treatment and a story that he wanted to get in. And I don't know, it just wasn't, for a guy that co-created the Marvel Universe, it just wasn't what you would expect. So we went through the basic library of Spider-Man, and we went back to the basics and did the origin story. Doc Ock was going to be the villain. We were told that. So we made Doc Ock a teacher at the school who had an immense fear of insects. And while he was demonstrating the Waldos and the radiation, whatever it was, a spider had slowly come down in front of him, and he started freaking out and swatting with his hands and the Waldos. And the spider was irradiated. There was a huge backflash explosion. He was caught in the explosion. The spider had gone and landed on Pete, hits Pete, so Doc Ock becomes Dr. Octopus at the same time Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man. But there's some severe, besides Walters being adhered to Dr. Octavius, there's something screwed up with the head. And so the overall eccentric villain sort of comes out of where he feels society owes him. And then Pete starts finding out more about his powers and experimenting. Liz Allen was the female. I think we were given we were told these were the characters. So I think we spent about 6 months' time in between while we heard that they were still going to go. And in our spare time, we wrote our Spider-Man: The Adventure Begins. And as talking to Joe, I think we met at one of the movie things. It wasn't. It was like it might have been the American Film Market or something, because Joe was also taking a look at Bob Gale's Doctor Strange because he really wanted to do a Marvel movie.
I remember. I'm still reading that script, and it looks faithful within the comic books.
Yeah, and I gave Joe, as per our previous discussion, the Spider-Man script. And Joe called me and said it was very true to the character, and he really, really liked it. That was the last I'd heard. But we had taken a lot of stuff, kind of what Marvel does today, from the original Spider-Man, and kind of sticking with the characters they wanted. We married the origins together, and we stole concepts and ideas from Amazing Fantasy, from Spider-Man 2, where he gets the camera, Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man 12, where he gets unmasked. And we just kind of integrated different concepts and put it all into one story. I dug it up finally, and I sent a copy to Tweet, sorry.
It's Tweet.
And
I was corrected last time we did this.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm Leva, not Leva, but I tend not to correct it anymore. Anyways, but it was just something that, it's a movie because Joe had said I was going to be Spider-Man. He was going to make sure of that. That I wanted, obviously, to get done one way or the other. So we kind of jumped on board and did that. I mean, the people that have read it liked it. So it kind of went by the wayside, and I think I just buried it with a bunch of other scripts in the garage at one point.
Hey, this question came up. Twee asked this, and I don't have an answer to this. There's this rumor, fan-based rumor, I think, that Michael Dudikoff was attached to the thing for a while.
Here's what happened. Is Menachem Golan had suggested Michael Dudikoff, and Joe Zito was adamant that absolutely, positively not going to do the role, that he was so wrong for it. But that, of course, Dudikoff was Cannon's big action. I think you guys have suggested Tom Cruise. I know that Joe...
Well, Tom Cruise and Scott Levin.
No, it's all good. I'll tell you, on a side note when we get to it, the how I finally got in to meet Joe Zito. But long story short, basically they kept throwing names out. Even when they got the rights to Superman, Menachem said, "Oh, Chris Reeve can play Spider-Man," and Tom Cruise's name was mentioned, and Tom Cruise wasn't interested.
Idiot. We could have made him a star.
Well, he was already on the road to stardom, thankfully for me, but then again, it doesn't matter because this movie never got made. But when they were doing the movie, I had met Stan a couple of times, but they were on promotions. There's a black and white photograph of me face-to-face with Stan Lee, which we did years ago. I'm in the Spider-Man costume, and he's, you know, there are two side views of us. So I'd done promotions, but I never really officially met him. And they were doing this commercial for donors that make sure that you're a donor with your driver's license and stuff. And I pushed really hard to get in. And they hired one of my friends as an actor to play Captain America. I got to play Spider-Man. This was shot at Marble West when it was on Sepulveda Boulevard, which now I think buys Gold Coin, whatever the place is.
Yeah.
So I made sure I got in, because everybody, Jim Shooter, Danny Fingeroth, everybody said I was the spitting image of Peter Parker from the comics, and they were pushing for me. And they said, you got to meet Stan. So I did the commercial, and they had some guy dressed in a big latex rubber thing costume and the Hulk costume, which was a monster to wear. And we're doing this, and I'm doing acrobatics and weird Spider-Man poses, and Stan goes, how do you do that? And I would say, I'm flexible. And he said, I gotta learn to do that. I said, no, you create and I'll do. So we would talk, and at the end of the day, I came in the office and I had the mask off. He says, you look like Peter Parker. You know they're doing a movie. And I said, I'd heard that. So he says, yeah, you should try to get in on it. And I said, I'm trying. So he said, well, you know, stay in touch. Let me see what I can do. So I would make some phone calls, and I had my agent following up and trying to get in. And I got in on the Invaders from Mars movie. And while I was on the set, I found out that Toby was no longer associated with it. And my one line got cut anyways. I'm still in the credits, but my one line got cut, which I don't care. And I was also supposed to go to the Cannes Film Festival. I'd already set up a relationship, and I was doing all the posters and all the photo work for Canon. So we did a lot of publicity shots prior to the movie even really being scripted, approved scripted, or anything else. I was associated with it. So I got Stan to make some calls to Joe Zito's office. And Stan literally said, I don't know what I can do. Nobody listens to me. I'm not important. And I said, Stan, you are the one guy that they have the most respect for. He said, well, I'll call Joe. So he calls my agent about 2 weeks later and says, who is this Scott Leva person? Everybody keeps mentioning his name. Now I get a call from Stan Lee. Can we meet? And I went, yes, I'm in the door. So Stan kind of opened that door for me, and I got in and met with Joe, and we were talking, and his wife was hanging out with him a lot. And we would talk Spider-Man. He would tell me about Spider-Man, and I gave him my whole take on Spider-Man, that Spidey is an extension of Pete. That Pete's not really as sarcastic and as confident when he's not wearing the mask. And I gave him this whole thing about Spidey is Pete's it. And Joe's sitting there with a smile on his face, and he's talking to his wife, and she's saying something about a charity benefit for the kids. And I said, well, hey, I'll make a phone call to Marvel. If you want, I can come out as Spider-Man. And Joe, of course, went crazy over it. The wife was just jumping up and down, and I went out and did a birthday party, which was a charity event for the wife. And I mean, giant swings off of trees and flipping and diving over the kids and hitting the Spider-Man positions. And Joe Zito comes in, and I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I want to see a guy that I have an interest in doing this, what he can do. And he was very impressed. And so I was slowly segueing into being political and watched the Joe Zito movies, all the way from the very first one, which was a rip-off of the Patty Hearst case. I forget the name of that movie. Not a good movie.
Did you see The Prowler?
Yeah.
John, that was the only one John and I looked at. I liked that. I thought it was pretty stylish.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I like a lot of what was shown and what was done, and I started to get to know as much about Joe Zito as I possibly could. And as it started getting into where I finally knew I was going to get an audition, I had a good relationship with Joe. And I was reading the script and I was working, and I had the worst time ever with the Spider-Man dialogue. It just wasn't flowing, and I finally turned to my agent and I said, you've got to call them and you've got to tell them that when I read Spider-Man, I've got to be in costume. And he looked at me and I said, trust me. He said, well, put on the costume. I put on the costume and the lines flowed. I became Spider-Man, and the problem was I had the same issues. Without the mask, it was difficult for me to be the Spider-Man with the banter or anything else. So Joe's office agreed to let me audition for Spider-Man as Spider-Man, and of course Peter is Peter. And we were at Canon Films, and there was a bunch of young guys there, no names. Joe wanted to make sure it was a role filled by an unknown. The other one that they were really pushing was a gymnast named Mitch Gaylord who did American Anthem, and Joe had a problem with him because he felt he couldn't act to save his life. But that was going to be a whole separate audition. They weren't even going to audition him. They wanted to give the role, and Joe was fighting against it. And thankfully, Joe was the powerhouse at Canning because his movies gross more than any other movie. So I go in, and all these guys are talking, Bill, what are you here for? I'm here for Spider-Man. What are you here for? And I'm like, my agent grabs me and takes me aside and says, you don't need that energy. Just walk away. And about 5 minutes before it was my time to go, I go into the venture room and I put on the Spider-Man suit. And I'm walking towards the office, and these actors are looking at me with this stunned look on my face. And I walk into Joe's office, and Joe applauds and laughs, and I get into Spider-Man, and I mean, I flip and I hold the positions, and then the dialogue flows, and I throw in a couple of sarcastic witticisms myself, and I pull the mask off, and I become Peter Parker. That was it. I walked away, and I hadn't heard anything, and I ran into Joe about a week and a half later at some other convention. That wasn't a comic convention, and Joe took me aside and said, you did a really fantastic audition. I just want you to know that. And I shouldn't say this, but you're my choice. And he says, you know, we're going to see, we're having some difficulties right now, but what you did, it was perfect. In the meanwhile, agents from the other actors were calling Canon and getting mad at them to say that an actor walked in with an unfair advantage that had the costume. Why didn't everyone else have the costume? And their answer was, the guy brought his own. So that was kind of how that happened. And then, as you know, everything kind of went flip-flop and all over the place. And there you have it.
The casting, which I know that that Tom Cruise was considered because he would look more like the John Romita version. And
well, John, if I may, John Brancato came up with him because he had seen All the Right Moves. I'm not even sure Risky Business had come out yet. But I looked at the guy's picture and I said, yeah, well, that's Johnny Romita's version. That's cool. Let's think of that. I think about that time, Scott and I actually met. Scotty, did you do the San Diego Comic Con about whatever year that was?
Yeah.
86?
Yeah. That was a mixture of both Marvel and Canon. That I was a Spider-Man at the San Diego Con, which they rarely had Spider-Man appearances at the San Diego Con. And now everybody is Spider-Man at the San Diego Con.
Yeah, because I was in heaven, really. I was there to talk about the project. And there was a dinner, some sort of show at the end, and I was sitting at a big table with the gal that I was with, and Stan Lee and his wife and a couple other people, and Spider-Man came up and said hi. And I went, wow, this is so cool. Well, it's Scott Leva.
Yeah, that was... yeah.
Adolf Caesar was considered to be the Detective Murata, which is in the Newsom script.
Yeah, once you've done the work, or even while you're doing it, you visualize certain things. And Adolf Caesar had done Soldier's Story. He'd been around for ages. He was a jobbing actor. I mean, you did whatever came along, a lot of voiceover and so forth. And I just liked him in that. It just this rough kind of middle-aged Lee J. Cobb as a detective type guy. And I thought, wait, and why not? Well, yeah, he's black. Hey, cool. Why not? Let's just use him and not even make a big deal about it. Give him an Italian name. And as it turned out, Joe had worked with. He said, well, I like that. That's a great idea.
Lauren Bacall and Katharine Hepburn were considered for Aunt May.
Yeah, my idea, because we hated Aunt May. She's such a pain. And to me, of all the characters in Spider-Man canon at the time, the 60s and 70s and in the 80s, she was the most cliche. The little old lady in lace and so forth. I mean, that was a cliche when they did it in Arsenic and Old Lace. That's 1942 or something like that. She's just such a pain to Peter, and So that's why we asked Stan, can we kill her off? So barring that, because we weren't going to be able to do that, we both thought, let's make her hipper than Peter. Let's make she comes into his apartment looking for him and sees the albums that Peter listens to and just rolls her eyes. He's listening to Frank Sinatra and she's listening to Tears for Fears, or that kind of stuff. And so who would we get? A woman in her 60s or 70s who would come off as hipper than Peter Parker, which would be practically anybody. And Katharine Hepburn came to mind because she had just done a picture for Canon, and I thought, well, they know her. Actually, she had such a dreadful time, she probably would have spit in their eye. But her or Lauren Bacall, which would have been cool. So that's.
Now, Joe had mentioned Jessica Tandy.
Another marvelous idea. A little softer, I think, than we would have done. It's actually like what's her name, the one who did it in the movies, and I should know her name. I met her, for God's sake. Met her and Cliff Robertson together.
Oh, you're talking about.
But yeah, Jessica Tandy would have been marvelous.
Yeah.
Although I hope she wouldn't drag along Hume Cronin as Uncle Ben. Oh, I guess he's right.
Yeah.
I think the actress's name, it's Rosemary Harris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
You are correct. Ding, 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 ding.
Well, even though she did play a great Aunt May, which in the...
She was okay. I thought she was okay.
Yeah.
The one thing that, blah, 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 Ted monopolizing the conversation. The one thing that I wanted to do, and John, in the Aunt May Uncle Ben thing, which was not necessarily canonical, it's not necessarily straight out of the comic books, is implied that May married beneath her. That Uncle Ben was really kind of this working stiff, a regular guy who really has nothing in common with Peter. He loves him, but they have nothing in common. Peter's a smart guy who's going to go far and so forth, and Ben is just a working guy. His idea of having a good time is popping open a beer and watching some TV wrestling or baseball, and that's it. And that there was a dynamic between May and Ben that wasn't there in that first Amazing Stories 15, is that what it is?
Amazing Fantasy. Amazing
Fantasies. Because Uncle Ben's only in about two panels of that. Better eat your wheat cakes there, Peter. That's about it. So that there was an undercurrent of them, of it not being a pleasant thing. That an unspoken tension between them. There was a tiny bit of that in the first Columbia movie. There's a little banter between them, which says that there's an edge there. But in general, they were far more cuddly and loving than we envisioned.
And I think the great casting choice for Octavius was Bob Hoskins.
Scotty, did Joe ever talk to you about casting for Octopus?
Yeah, he liked Bob Hoskins. Mm-hmm. And he even made that statement. He says, "Can you imagine? Well, take a look at Bob with having that beetle mop hair." He says, "That's not God."
Uh-huh.
So
I think that was John Rancado's suggestion.
I know that Joe liked that one. Joe liked that one a lot. I mean, I don't know. I got a lot of inside information from Joe was very forthcoming with me. I heard a lot of things about the script. I heard a lot of things about
those asshole writers that he fired.
You know, it wasn't. There was a mixed thing. I didn't, because you know, forget my relationship with you. The problem is I liked it, and I didn't quite get why they were having trouble with it.
Let me do a mea culpa here and explain why there was a deal. We met with Joe just after he secured the job, and he was excited about it. He was like really jazzed. But you know, not, you know, he could not really explain what he wanted at the time. My partner John had pretty much an utter disregard for it. And my partner tends to be very smart and very ex-partner, by the way, for about 20 years. He's got a wicked sense of humor and doesn't suffer fools very well, and classified Joe as a fool. Now, we had agreed with Joe that we'd build this thing. We'd work on it for a week or two, come in, talk to him about what we'd done, alter things, you know, do some more stuff, come in, back up, because he wanted very much to be part of creating the script. And we'd been working on it for 2 or 3 weeks, and I said to John, well, you know, we better call Joe and sit down and talk. And he said, fuck him. He's an idiot. I said, well, yeah, okay, fine. But we agreed to do this, and yeah, I mean, that's really what we ought to do. He said, that's not the way we write scripts. You know, we'll write it, he'll get it when it's done. And I went, yeah, okay. And Joe would call me at home. He called 2 or 3 times in succeeding weeks saying, you know, when can I see some pages? I'm really excited about this, but you know, you guys said you were going to come in. And I'd dodge, and I'd say, well, you know, it'll be pretty soon. Yeah, what? And I finally said, well, I don't have a printer, which is quite true. But if you want to come over here and read it on my computer, I'd have no problem with it. And he said, no, that's okay. Just you know, I'd like to see something. The tearing point came. I mean, we may have worked on it for 6-8 weeks or so, and about 6 weeks into it, John went on a vacation with friends down to Baja California for an extended weekend, and came back it was a wild, drunken, tequila-filled, drug-fueled weekend, and he was just a mess. I mean, he couldn't even function. You know, for that day, he was just massively hungover. And you know, we decided that perhaps today isn't the right day to sit down and do work. And Joe called, and John talked to him. And Joe was extremely angry. He said, you guys, you know, you broke your word. You said you were going to, you know, work with me on this. I haven't seen a thing. You know, you're almost done with it now. I haven't had any input on it at all. I mean, what's the deal here? And John just said, look, I'm sick. I'm not going to talk to you. Don't bother me. And hung up on him. And I, stupidly, in retrospect, but in defense of my friend, I called our agent and I said, look, Joe just called here and he got mad at my partner, and you know, and we'd really rather not have this go on. And our agent got angry, and he called Canon and told them, don't have this director call. He's going to get a script pretty soon. Tell him to back off. And Canon did. And Joe, who I talked to later about this, he said, if you guys had just kept your word, you'd still be working on this. And I said, yeah, I know. It was, in retrospect, it was a mistake. I didn't like lying to Joe while we were doing it. I didn't like breaking our word, whether or not that's how we did other scripts or not. We had said we were going to do this, and we didn't. And I fully understand why Joe said, I can't work with these guys. So that's it from our end.
And I remember that Barney was hired also. Barney Cohen.
Yeah, Barney Cohen, who had worked with Joe on Friday the 13th part, what? I don't know.
Part 4.
48?
Part 4.
46.
40, yeah. That was, yeah. It was, yeah, Jason meets an oak tree or something. But they got along. They were friends, and Barney's a terrific writer. And he called him and called him in for a rewrite. And according to Barney, what he told me was that he read the script and then went back to Joe and said, "Why rewrite it? It's fine the way it is." And Joe had other visual things that he wanted to add and so forth. And so Barney did a second draft. We were contractually due to do a second draft, because that's generally how it is. Do a script, and contractually you're obligated to do a rewrite per the director and the producer's input. But we were fired after the first draft. Everybody was happy with it, and we got paid for not doing the second draft. I would have rather have done it, obviously, because we were happy with it. Menachem was happy with it. Joe was happy with it. But I understand Joe saying, I can't work with these guys. He was absolutely right.
And I think one of the scenes in the script was where it was a chase scene where Octavia's horse he does a whirl gig on the extent of his arms, much more like a cart.
Yeah, like a Ferris wheel or something.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I mean, maybe that image appeared in some Spider-Man comic along the way. I just seeing Doc Ock do this mechanical Waldo arms extended whirling flip-flop down the street is not. I don't think that's a particularly neat image, but whatever.
And of course, I only read the one that was submitted by Golan with his pen name Joseph Goldman in 1989. I read it and it was awful. And well, I don't blame Barney for it, but it's just what the script is represented as.
No, you can blame Barney for it. I mean, that's what writers do.
Yeah, well, no, and yes, absolutely. Every writer's work is absolutely perfect the way it is, and every writer who rewrites it or adds to it or subtracts to it afterward is a no-talent act. And that includes the fifth writer on it, who did the best job ever, and even better than the first four, and everything after the fifth job is crap. I mean, that's just the way writers are.
So I found there were some ideas, which of course in the Goldman copy I had, which has of course Octavius says "okie dokie" many times, which I didn't like.
Now Joe liked that.
And then we can blame Joe for it.
Because he really, because I brought that up to him. Because when we were talking scripts and they were having problems with scripts and this and that and everything else, which is where I stupidly stepped up and said, well, let me try one. What the hell?
Well, it wasn't that stupid. I'm surprised, actually, and suspicious in a way that your script did not apparently become part of the official family, because it went to Canon and it went to Joe. And there is at least one other script that was written independently by Daryl something or other, that was submitted to Cameron, which became part of the legal family lineage.
It's Darren.
Script.
Darren Ewing.
I forget.
Darren Ewing, that's his name.
Darren Ewing, yes. Which is very odd, because he was never hired by anybody. He did it for the same reason you did. I want to write a Spider-Man script, I'm going to do it on my own. And he apparently met with Cameron, who liked some of the things in it, and said, yeah, if I use any of this stuff, you'll be paid. Yeah, right. But the Ewing script became listed in the legal paperwork between Canon and MGM, and later MGM to Sony Columbia. And I'm surprised and a little suspicious that yours didn't. There would be more reason for yours to be part of that than this Ewing thing.
Again, I don't know. As I said, Joe, and I don't know why he would lie to me, but said he thought it was fantastic. He said,
I think he probably wasn't.
You know, and whatever happened with it, I was hoping one way or the other. I stayed away from a lot of your stuff because I don't want to copy something that, quite frankly, you know, why names were changed. Max Roman to Max Reese and blah, blah, blah. Is...
Well, you might have made him like Jaime Roman or something.
Well, he was Max in the comic.
Oh, okay.
So we kept the name Max. We stuck with as much, and we named the company Cadence after Cadence Industry. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff that we did that, you know, borrowed from the comics. We called one of the characters Lever after Stanley Lever and Larry Lever. So we stole a lot specifically from the comic, but because of legal issues and everything else. And again, not just saying it, I like the script. I like what you did. I thought, you know, Stan's assistant, I don't know if you remember her.
Yes, she was the head of the fan club for Simon McCorkindale.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, she was a pain in the ass. I don't remember how I got involved with something to where they said that I didn't like the script, which was your script and Ted Newsom's, and I think yours and John's, what did I just say? And I think it pissed off John. Well, who is this guy and why is he being here? And I had nothing to say with it. It was her opinion. She put more into Stan, and she didn't have half the rights to do what she did under Stan's name. But it was a whole really bizarre and strange thing. I know the biggest thing Stan wanted out of anything else, and as much as he had problems that nobody liked his script, is he wanted to play J. Jonah Jameson. And that was first and foremost, above and beyond anything else. That's what he wanted.
And given Stan and how he is and what he is and so forth, I think that would have been fun gimmick casting. You know, and if they would have done to him what they did to the guy in the Raimi films, where he looks exactly like him, I think that could have been a lot of fun. Well,
Steve supposedly fashioned J. Jonah Jameson after Stan. Steve Ditko.
There you go.
You know, so my understanding. You know, but anyway.
And
it would have been perfectly circular.
Yeah.
And the other thing I found in the script is that Octavius says he's the true Spider-Man. He claims to be the true Spider-Man when he says it's true Spider-Man. And when Octavius is kidnapping Liz, and I'm just like, oh, this is not even good.
Well, yeah. Let's since Scott, did you ever read Barney's rewrite before Menachem Golan got a hold of it?
Yeah, I did. I didn't like it. The problem that I've had, and it's difficult to do, is they're missing the character. Josh, what's his name from, because this goes with the story of the script, to answer your question. The one that was in Hunger Games. Josh
Hutcherson, I think is his name. Hutcherson?
Yes, Josh Hutcherson did a audition.
Oh yeah, I remember. He was going to do
Spider-Man.
He was going to do the Mark Webb version.
Yeah, for the new one, for the Mark Webb version. And here's the problem: is he did this really cool action sequence with Peter Parker, and it was all these Spider-Man moves. But what he missed was what everyone else did was they made it all about the action. And as soon as Spider-Man put on the suit, it was web swinging and fighting and jumping, but you lost the sense of the character. In Spider-Man with Tobey, as soon as you put on the costume, it was Spider-Man the animated movie. Barney had no concept of the character. He got a concept of a Spider-Man story, but he was missing on who the character was. And until Marvel gets a hold of it like they did, you know, Captain America Civil War, that's Spider-Man. You know, you ever been in a fight before? You really talk that much? And it's the nervous energy, the movie, the excitement playing with the big boys. Everything that's there, which is what Marvel does, where Iron Man comes out in this really cool, you know, the original Iron Man suit. They go back to basics. You know, Captain America goes back to World War II. They go back to the basics of the origin. I mean, okay, people are happy with the new Doctor Strange with the ancient one. I think the ancient one could be anyone. It could be a cat. You don't know. There's something mythical about it, whatever. Barney was missing the crux of the character. The witticism, the sarcasm, the insecurities. And it was about every time he puts on the suit. So if you go and watch Josh's audition, it's this guy jumping around the gym. First of all, how the hell can you not know now that Peter Parker's Spider-Man? Always in the comic, he backed off. He wanted to punch this guy, and he knew he couldn't. So he would avoid him. He would duck. He would get out of the way. And they go, Flash, come on! Oh, come on! Lay a punch on him. Quit playing around. And I did that in the script, but I stole that from Spider-Man #8 because Flash is trying to beat the crap out of Pete, and Pete's avoiding every punch he can because he doesn't want to hurt Flash. God help him if he does. People might think he's Spider-Man, which is a little narcissistic because why would anybody think Peter's Spider-Man? But the overall making this all about the action, you lose sight of the character. So to answer the question, great, we got a bunch of swings and punches and this and that, but you're losing who the character is. And that was my problem with Barney Cohen, and I lost interest in it very quickly.
There is, one of the things you brought up is kind of inherent in doing any Spider-Man. When you've got a character in disguise, where he's absolutely unrecognizable in costume, you could have, you know, an anonymous stuntman do all of that, and you wouldn't know. That's, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't see who it is. And that to us was impetus to make sure Spider-Man kept saying something. So at least you'd have the actor's voice in there. You know, because you simply don't see his face. And you know, we wanted it to be a character, an extension of Peter. You know, Peter's head is perfect. That is the way to describe it.
One of the pathetic things in the script was the Wiener character, which I was like, well, when I first read it, like the first time, before I delved into heavily researching of Spider-Man film, I just when I was reading it, it was the fake James Cameron the submitted copy. So I started reading it and I started laughing the okie dokie line, and then I started laughing like the dialogue of Wiener, and then now I'm just thinking, okay, this just looks like a fucking stupid mess. And
yeah, that, you know, that apparently comes out of Barney and Joe's collaboration, and somebody decided that Octopus needed a sidekick. I don't know why. I think that's one of the things that distracts, for me anyway, in the first Superman movie. Why does the most brilliant criminal mind of our time have idiots around him? That doesn't make him any bigger, scarier, or meaner. That makes him look like an idiot. Why? No,
because it's comic relief, and you know, it's Mark Lester's take on Superman. Here's the thing, and you can either agree or disagree with me on this one, Ted. the thing that makes the hero the best hero are his villains. You've got, Batman's got the coolest villains ever.
Yes.
Joker is, you know, second to none, his worst. And all of them, the Riddler, Penguin, Mr. Freeze, I can go on. Well, Spider-Man goes into that boat. What makes Spider-Man so incredible is they were always introducing what became iconic villains. You know, you had the Vulture, you had Doc Ock, you had the Green Goblin who came, you know, in issue 14, almost a year later. And he became so off the wall that he became the ultimate villain for Spider-Man that destroyed Spidey's life in many ways. But the villains, I mean, later on in the 90s where they came up with the Gibbon and they came up with the Kangaroo, it's like, okay, you guys are grasping the straws now.
I'm sorry they never did the Mandrill.
Or, you know, it's just, oh, the Sloth. What are you going to do? I'm going to just slow you down. You know, but it's, the villains were the coolest thing. And, you know, the Venom thing was cool and it was different. Now, to me, the villains are lacking. You know, they changed things. Osborn and all this other stuff. And in the Marvel Universe, nobody really dies. You know, it's not The Walking Dead. It's not the Game of Thrones outside of Jon Snow. Spoiler alert, who does come back. You know, it is, when they're gone, they're gone. And when Gwen is dead, Gwen is dead. She doesn't come back in the coolest, sexiest suit that makes her popular that every nerd boy wants her in a comic now. It really needs to stick with when he's gone, he's gone. And they don't do that. You know, Uncle Ben did. Well, Uncle Ben came back in an alternate universe, and the alternate universe is the most amazing, realistic BS thing ever. Oh, look who's back. And now he's Spider-Man. How many people have been Spider-Man? But you go back to the basics of what made these people so incredible. Superman with a bald genius villain really doesn't do it for me because all I got to do is punch his face in and we're done. Okay? You need someone that keeps Superman on his toes, like Batman. Fantastic Four, dear God, they got Dr. Doom. I mean, and you know, you can't get more evil, maniacal than that, for God's sake. So the Marvel villains tend to enhance the overall
frisson.
Of the way the superhero is.
Tension, dynamic tension.
Yeah, and they add to it, and that makes it, you know, and when you take away that dynamic, you know, you've got a whole library of characters. You know, now Michael Keaton's playing the Vulture,
Yes.
which I can see, but you've got this whole dynamic of really cool villains that enhances who the hero is. And DC outside of Batman, thank God for Finger, what's his name?
Bill Finger.
Bill Finger. I mean, that's the creator behind the Joker and every other look of Batman. You might have the guy taking credit for creating Batman, and he did create the concept, but that's your guy that came out with this entire off-the-wall library. You know, and Stan and Steve and Jack came up with, I mean, you know, Galactus, for God's sake, each world. I mean, you don't really get any more crazy than that how are we going to stop it? I got the ultimate nullifier, you know, and even things like Juggernaut with the X-Men. I mean, some of the X-Men say, how do you stop the unstoppable? You know, but that's what you have to play with, and that gives you can do all sorts of things so long as you stay true to the character. And up to this point, nothing against Sam Raimi and nothing against, you know, it just wasn't Spider-Man. Even the villains weren't treated the way the villains should be treated. That's my opinion. So, what are they going to do? Not hire me? Take back my awards? I don't care. Go for it.
I absolutely agree. The better the villain, the better the hero. There was a potential series back in the 80s called The Destroyer, which is based on a long-running pocket book series, which was a marvelous character and marvelous over-the-top, great villains. And they did one, the Dick Clark company did one movie. Fred Ward played the hero, who was an average guy who becomes, you know, a super-ish character. But the problem there is the one you've just spoken of. The villain was colorless. The villain was a rough, tough general who wanted to go to war with Canada or something like that. It was dumb. You needed a colorful, exciting, operatic bad guy to match the height and the breadth and the size of your good guy. Because otherwise, you know, who cares? That's a problem that they had with the Spider-Man TV show. You know, you've got a potentially great hero, and they did some nice stunts there, and they climbed buildings and all that kind of stuff, and they always threw him up against, four guys with suits. And he punched them and put a net on them, and that was that. Well, guys, get a bad guy going there.
You want somebody, so, I mean, again, we can go to what you're seeing on TV. Game of Thrones, your villain is about as evil as they can possibly be, and you want to see them get their comeuppance. You know, everything they do to the other people. You know, the one that just, in season 6, with the War of the Bastards, I mean, you want this guy to meet his end. You know, in Walking Dead, Negan, I mean, dear God, before that you had the Governor, and then you had Terminus. You got some scary people out there that make survival so difficult, but enhances the story. Because your bad guys are so incredibly bad that it moves the story. So, you know, rule 1, if you're going to do an action-adventure comic book or something, it's really going to center on how bad is your bad guy. Not a guy with Waldo arms that does cartwheels. Who cares?
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, if that guy with Waldo arms is so insanely focused on some obscure scientific experiment that he threatens not only the entire world but the entire universe, now you got something.
Well, he's a scary character. He's a scary character with those Waldos, just tear a person apart piece by piece, realistically. And it's his beliefs, and how he sees the world and what he's doing. He's scary. The problem is, he wasn't handled scary with Barney Cohen or Leslie Stevens or anyone else, quite frankly, outside of you guys that have a simple concept. I mean, again, if John wasn't so self-indulgent, like, fuck him, God knows where it would go.
Yeah, we'd all be old, rich, and famous by now.
And I'd be doing conventions and signings of comic books at the time. Oh, weren't you? Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
They'd hire you back to do Uncle Ben.
Yeah. Yeah, God knows. The guy looking out the train window or the plane window. Yeah.
And then cut your dialogue anyway.
Yeah, whatever. It's okay.
And I forgot to mention this, that Ted, when you were writing your script, you envisioned Christopher Lee as Thorkel.
Yeah, I wanted to, because I'm a Hammer fan from way back. I did a documentary that's got some very nice notices over the years on Hammer Films, the English company that did all the remakes of Frankenstein, Dracula, on the BBC, and so on. And Christopher Lee was in town at the time. He lived here for about 6 or 7 years. Our character, one of the antagonists at the university, antagonist to Octavius, was a stuffy, prissy, authoritarian, well, he was a jerk, character, and I thought, well, Christopher Lee would be marvelous, as that, and he's here, and then I think secondary to that, we had a nice professor who was a friend, kind of a mentor to Peter. I thought, well, make that Peter Cushing, and get these two guys together for a couple of scenes. So that was our Razumov. Razumov was his name meant something to John Brancato, a friend of his, which became, for no reason I can see, Razumorph in Barney's rewrite. I don't know, maybe to make the character his own. I don't know, or misspelling. Anyway, yeah, so Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, Scott Leva, who nobody had heard of yet, but boy, he's going to be a star. Opposite Bob Hoskins as Dr. Octopus. Hey, this is sounding pretty good.
Originally the budget was going to be about like 20 million, which when Barney's version was written, it was going to be like 10 to 18 million.
Well, it was more on the high end. I think Joe had said it was going to be like 18 or 20 million, which was a big film. I mean, it's a giant film for Canon, a giant film for its time, which is 85, 86.
Yeah.
And it would have been a lot of money for them. And then the rains came.
The thing that was interesting is I was slated to go to the Cannes Film Festival and do all this Spider-Man stuff and present Spider-Man. And it was really cool. And we had set this stuff up. I was going to France, and they wanted to set up some Spider-Man stunts. And this is how long ago that was. I was very close friends with Dar Robinson.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted Dar to come out, and he wanted to come out with the wife, and he said they don't have to pay me anything, they just have to pay the trip. And we had come up with these really cool Spider-Man appearances all over areas of the con. And
parenthetical note, so anybody listening to this knows what Scott is talking about. Dar, D-A-R, Robinson, was one of the greatest stuntmen of recent history.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, without a doubt, when he said it could be done, and he would prove it. But suddenly, out of the blue, with all this publicity shots and all this other stuff, they literally just said, you know what, we're not bringing Spider-Man to Cannes. And I'm thinking, well, that's a mistake. That's going to be your big figurehead. So they decided not to. In the meanwhile, Menachem was already in the talks before they went to Cannes to meet with the Salkinds and buy the rights to Superman, which is a sure hit. Because look at why else would they want to sell it? It was so they got on board, and Chris was contracted for a fourth. And while they're there, they talk to Mattel Toys, and they buy the rights to Masters of the Universe with Dolph Lundgren. And they're thinking, we don't need Spider-Man. We've got a surefire hit, which of course sunk Canon Films. They showed $25–30 million, went over budget, and did these movies that were so incredibly bad that absolutely, hands down, the company went under. And when they were going to finally do Spider-Man with Albert Pyun, it was budgeted at $1.5 million. So,
and that's I talked to Joe before that, but afterward as well, and he said on record several times when they came back to him and said, okay, well, you can still do Spider-Man, but here's what the budget's going to be. He just said, I can't do this film for that kind of money. I think he had said $7 or $8 million.
It was, between $5 to $7 million.
Yeah. But my guess is if they could have done it and only spent $1.5 million, that's what they would have done, and then said it was $100 million.
Yeah, well, I've got the Albert Pyun script in someplace. I mean, it's in a box with all my other scripts, and it sucks. Mm-hmm. And you can tell it can't be done because he does a lot more running around in the costume and fighting, and there's very little web swinging. Yeah. But then for $1.5 million, you're lucky if he's just not going to run around in some underoos.
And there were like chases in this. There's scenes in the script like chases in the sewers.
Yeah, well,
Something like that, and I mean, I don't really remember. I was disappointed because I kept trying to get in again, and I got a call from Albert Payun's office to send my headshot. And I got excited, and I sent the headshot, and about a week later I find out, well, he wanted the headshot because he was sending it to the casting and said, hey, I want an actor cast that looks like this, but younger.
Oh boy, that's the. Can I tell the old this 5 stages of an actor, the 5 stages of an actor's career? In this case, who is Scott Leva? Hit me, Scott Leva. Hit me a Scott Leva type. Get me a young Scott Leva.
Yeah.
And then finally, who is Scott Leva? It looked like you graduated from 2 to 3 at that point. So stupid. So
Yeah.
And well, even though that Shepard Goldman, when he collaborated with Payun with the script, the Spider-Man script, there was like a non-Marvel villain which was called the Nightghoul, who was a vampire bat creature and a human cadaver.
Yeah, well, I read the 3 scripts, the Shepard Goldman thing, Don Michael Paul's rewrite of that, and then Ethan Wiley's 3rd take on that, which is only kind of in passing resemble it. They're not good, no, and they're not particularly Spider-Man. The impression I got from the Shepard Goldman thing was it was like Porky's. Except this guy occasionally put on a Spider-Man suit. But given the parameters they were given, which is, here, do this big spectacular action picture. We got Spider-Man, we got to have action and superheroes and blah blah blah, and we got $1.5 million to do it. What the hell are you gonna do? That's tying both hands and your feet behind your back and saying, okay, now jump. That's an impossible situation.
The biggest problem and concern I would have with Spider-Man in 1989 is not the story and not the characters so much as we really didn't have the technology, I think, to logistically make it, because a crap load of CGI would have had to have been done for Doc Ock, and a crap load of CGI would have had to have been done for Spidey, that I don't think we were at that point yet.
I agree, and even if you look at something with as much money as they had on the first 2 Superman movies, a lot of that is substandard, which makes no sense. They've got all the money in the world. They've got Warner Brothers behind them. They're shooting, on the biggest stage in England.
Iowa Studios, yeah.
And they still got these blue screen shots with little, fuzzy lines around the elements. Technology hadn't quite caught up with where it ought to have gone by then.
No, and it hadn't, and that's the problem. But the thing that made it work again was Superman. It was Chris Reeve. I mean, again, even with that, they had different uniforms. They had a blue screen uniform because of that. And you could tell. I mean, you may as well put 2 actors in the car with the moving screen behind it. Always my favorite, which they still use today. Not to change the subject, but if anyone saw anything, I did not make the Comic-Con this year, but Ezekiel, who's coming out this season on The Walking Dead, and his tiger, Shiva, you look at that thing, that is a CGI tiger, and it looks like crap. Maybe it's just, it takes away. Superman you accept, you got, Harmon, who was the premier flyer at the time, flying Chris Reeve. But it wasn't that far off from what they did with George Reeve.
No.
So.
No, you will believe a man can fly. I believe George Reeves can fly. What are you guys talking about?
Some of the flying sequence where they had him on that moving trolley where he kind of swerved when he was in the Fortress of Solitude, very cool. And they had skydivers jumping and trying to phone, but to actually make him fly outside of putting a blue screen next to him, easier said than done.
Well, he could. There's such. We're off on a tangent, thank goodness. But they were so jazzed about that Zoptic thing. Zolan, whatever, came up with this great backscreen thing, which had never been done before. Well, it had never been done exactly that way before, where you got a figure up front, like Christopher Reeve, taking off right toward camera, where the desert falls beneath him. It doesn't look any different, and it looks just as foggy as two guys sitting in half a car in front of a back process projector. Why is this supposed to be? I mean, this is crap.
Yeah, and again, without putting anything down, that's where I had my concern was it's going to be difficult to portray Spider-Man the way you would think he is in the comics. I think they overdid it in the movies where he's doing these contortionist moves while he's swinging and flying through the air. And by the way, what is he attaching to? He's above the Empire State Building. There ain't nothing higher in New York. So, the web swinging again, Captain America Civil War, that was some pretty cool web swinging. And it was the giant swings, and it was CGI, but it worked. And now we're at that place where I think we can make Spider-Man do what Spider-Man should do. But we would have had to have done a lot of practical stunts. They were talking to Fred Waugh, who had done the TV series. And that was cool, but it was cables going up a wall, or he was on a cable, and they'd release the cable, and he'd flip to the floor, and then they'd reverse it. And it's still... And Fred walked like he had a stick up his butt. He's a friend of mine. But whenever he's Spider-Man, he thought Spider-Man should have this weird walk. Again, I think for me it would have been a fantastic coup. I would have loved it. It would have been cool to do. Might have given something that nowadays when they did it, that's the movie they want to do better. Mm-hmm. Instead of like, right now, you see a movie and it's like, we can do it better. Instead of like, that was a really cool movie and for what they did, it was fantastic. Now let's take that and make it better. Instead of like, well, that was crap. We can do better. Which is kind of what I see out there now.
Ethan Wiley, I'll get to the whole thing again. Ethan Wiley, who was a writer, filmmaker, and an special effects guy. He was one of the puppeteers on Gremlins and had done several other films in that capacity. So he understood practical effects and budgetary limitations. He had written House. I think William Katt was the lead in that. But it was a very clever horror film with something to say, and he'd written and directed the sequel, House 2. He got the assignment to essentially rewrite the two low-budget things that they'd gone through. And he did a very sensible thing, given the budget. He said, look, we don't have the budget to do a Spider-Man movie top to bottom, so it's going to be a Peter Parker movie up until about the last 25 minutes. At which point he dons the suit and confronts the bad guy and so on. In this, he took an element of what is really the only element he took from the other two scripts. The Night Ghoul was a vampire character, drank blood and so on. What Ethan did is twist that and use an addictive drug that was like a combination of crack and steroids, and it just became this terribly, terribly popular drug, and it was a threat to society and so on and so on. And that essentially became the bad guy. He juiced up on this stuff, and you were just insane. Spider-Man had to fight I don't know, I think one of his old professors in the end was, this homicidal semi-vampire crazy guy. But that was a sensible take, I think, given the restrictions, the budget restrictions that he was dealing with. And I think he did a very good job. He's a good writer. It wasn't our Spider-Man, But it was a Spider-Man.
When Gallant separated from his cousin in 1988 because an Italian financier, I guess, John Carperetti,
Giancarlo Peretti.
Okay.
He's a criminal. He's a guy, briefly. Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, God bless them, overplayed their hand. As Scott described earlier on, they went on these insane, megalomaniacal tangents. In addition to overspending on things, underspending on others, they would make these grand announcements of films that they want to do, and we're going to have Sylvester Stallone in Pinocchio, and so, and they wouldn't have bothered to tell Stallone that. And here's this picture on a 2-page spread in Variety, and Stallone says, "Oh, what's the deal? I ain't doing Pinocchio. What? And they pissed off Dustin Hoffman and 2 or 3 directors, and they were not well beloved in the community. And everybody thought Canon just made shit, which is not entirely true, not 100% true. But they weren't well regarded, and they were financially leveraged to the max. It was like Buster Keaton running down the hill, followed by every boulder in the world. I mean, they were straining to try to stay away from their creditors, and it finally caught up with them. And they cut corners and so forth. That's one reason, among others, that Superman 4 looks so awful. I think they budgeted $20 or $30 million, and they ended up spending about 18. And so they dissolved. And this Giancarlo Peretti, who was a mob guy, he'd been like a baker in Rome or something, and then suddenly he's this megalomaniacal international financier. He bought MGM, and they went in negotiations with Canon and essentially bought them out. Menachem Golan split. He wasn't going to have anything to do with them. And in lieu of payment, because they weren't going to pay Golan anything, he kept several properties that Canon had developed, including Spider-Man. And that gets us up to about, 1988.
You see, you have a bunch of fans that were associated with Spider-Man that really wanted to see it made. Marvel was a comic book company. Marvel sold the rights to its figurehead characters, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Captain America. They sold the rights, and before they decided to get into their own filmmaking, everyone from 20th Century Fox brought out X-Men. To this day, even though I'm associated with the first X-Men, is not the way X-Men should have been done. They lost their main crux of big time. Spider-Man is Marvel. When you look at Marvel, when you look at Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, which has never been done correctly. The guy that had the rights to Spider-Man made a deal with Corman to make it because he had to have it filming by a certain date to extend the rights.
Well, that's Fantastic Four, you mean?
Yeah. So everything that was out there, and then Marvel wanted everything back. And now you've got all these companies that don't know what to do with it. On X-Men, I worked with the assistant to Lauren Schuler Donner. His name was Kevin Feige.
Yes.
And he was the biggest Marvel fan, and we got along, and all we talked was characters and how to make it work. And when I was doing the Statue of Liberty head fight, and why this didn't work or that worked. And the producers had another thing. They brought in a Hong Kong guy to do the Wolverine and Mystique fight. On a side note, I had this concept that she kept morphing into things. He would kick this woman and she would hit the wall, and next thing you know, she would morph into like a chameleon, and you wouldn't know where she is. And it was a constant fight to where she was constantly zigzagging around. And I wanted to hire a contortionist that she does these awkward, weird moves. At one point, Wolverine swings, she goes and ducks, goes underneath her legs, grabs his legs, and flips him. Finally, Wolverine closes his eyes and takes her out because he uses the sense of smell. He loved it. They brought in this Hong Kong guy that put this fight together. And don't get me wrong, they love the Statue of Liberty fight I put together. But they wanted a big, big name, which was Corey Ewan. Corey kept having Wolverine run away from the fight. And I would say, well, why is he running away? Because he wants to rescue Rogue. And I said, no. He takes care of business, then he moves on. Because if he doesn't take care of business, there's no way he's going to get up to rescue her. He always finishes business. So I finally had a talk with Tom DeSanto, and Tom took them aside and said, no, do the fight, then he goes. But Kevin was a huge Marvel fan. Tom DeSanto, who is also a huge Marvel fan, that's now doing Transformers, was offered a position at Marvel that Kevin ultimately got. The reason Marvel is so successful as a movie company, now you got to understand, Marvel looked at his library and said, well, all our first-tier characters are gone. But we got some cool second-tier. We got Iron Man. We got Captain America back. We got Thor. We got Doctor Strange. And they made movies the Marvel way. And by the Marvel way, I mean the way Marvel first established itself with dysfunctional, off-the-wall characters and based on characters. And the most successful Iron Man, Captain America. Now they're looking at third-tier characters. Well, you know, we got Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, why are they not hiring A-list directors? They're not hiring A-list directors and making A-list directors because we have control. You are not going to tell us this is what the character does. We're going to tell you this is what the character does. And it's successful. And it's the way Marvel Comics used to do Marvel Comics. Which is why if they can get their main tier characters back, Fantastic Four, now they've got Spider-Man even though it's associated with. What we had back then was so much by committee that Marvel had no control over. Okay, I don't like what Newsom and Brancato are doing, screw you, you're fired. And you got two people there that kind of get a sense of the character, but you're not playing by my rules, so I'm going to take the ball away and send you home. And now I'm going to get someone that doesn't really get it, that wants to write because he's a writer, but is not really a fan of Spider-Man, or a fan of this or that. So we get movies out there which people are going to line up to see Spider-Man originally because they've been dying to see Spider-Man. It's been teased since 1981. Spider-Man the movie. So you can put a monkey in the costume, they're going to line up to go see Spider-Man. Now they may not like it, but they'll watch the sequel because it's still Spider-Man. So that's what John and Ted and me and Joe and all these people had against them, was everything was by committee. That whether it's not looking at what could take something that lasted and was so popular and so well loved for so many years, stick with the original. They did it with Superman. They went back to basics. You know, Chris made you believe that there's no way in hell when you saw Clark Kent would you ever think that guy was Superman. When you look at him in the comic, you even look at George with these big padded shoulders, you go, oh, come on. Who can't say, come on. Seriously? Like, you know, Chris comes off with his nebbish, the way he carries his body and everything else. And he makes you not only believe a man can fly, but there's no way you're going to put the two together. So the coolest thing ever, but that's going back to basics, which is what the original premise was for Canon, but Canon didn't get a sense of that.
Well, I utterly agree. Now, let me ask, Kevin Feige, is it, or Feige?
I think it's Feige. I just knew it was Kevin.
I'm going to assume he's roughly our age, so he'd now be, you know, plus or minus late 50s, early 60s, which means that he grew up with the comics.
Oh, yeah.
And back then, we're talking 25, 30 years ago, we, the kids who grew up with this stuff and understood what it was instinctively, even if we didn't study it and have every comic, in the closet, we knew what it was supposed to be, but we weren't in charge. You know, a generation older than us or a generation after that was in charge, and they didn't get it. And what's happened over the last 20 years now is that the guys that did grow up with this stuff are now in charge, and they understand it. That's certainly apparent in Marvel.
Well, that's the key right there, Ted. And it is apparent in Marvel, and it's not apparent with DC. DC is dark, and they're going for action and visual and this. You know, you're using Watchmen, and you're using the comic book as a storyboard. And, you know, you got Moore who says it's unfilmable. This is not a movie. And it wasn't a movie. But you're missing a fanboy at DC that says, this is what Superman should be. Everything else goes down the garbage chute. Let's go back to Superman circa 1938. Let's go back to Superman. Let's go back to the Batman. You know, let's go back with fun and excitement and what it was. That's what Marvel did. They went back to 1963, updated it, and they made what made those characters. And you got a fanboy there that's the way it's going to be. That's the Marvel way. Where they're not. They spend a lot of money on the movies, but their actors don't get the top dollars, and they're bringing in, you know, new directors constantly. DC is missing the ball, but they need a huge DC fan that sits there and goes, well, that's not what Superman would do. Why did we change that?
We're off on a wonderful tangent here, but one of the reasons that I like the first Superman movie is that they had a champion of the character in Richard Donner.
Yes.
Who actually understood the character. Now, the Salkinds didn't. They didn't have a clue. I don't know that Tom Mankiewicz, who rewrote all the script, necessarily did, but it was a lot closer than, Mario Puzo. You know, you don't hire a 60-year-old writer to write a comic book. A big crime thing, that's just silly. But, it gave him some publicity. But Donner understood it. I mean, and Christopher Reeve understood it. He apparently was very serious about his, taking this iconic role and so on. But he knew the character, and he knew what it had to be loyal to where the source was. And they didn't have it then. They do now, or at least some of them do.
Yeah, well, I had actually got to work on the first Superman film when they shot in New York. And we shot some stuff for Superman 2, which never made it, where Lois suddenly thinks maybe Clark is Superman. And she jumps off out of a window, and he uses his heat vision to do something with one of the vegetable stand's canopies and catches her. We shot that with the local stunt girl. And when Chris first walked out in the suit, and they put the cape on and they got it tied underneath his arms, I'm looking at Superman, and I'm telling you, I was thrilled. And that guy was one of the nicest guys you've ever met, but he was Superman. And Dick Donner had a vision that the Salkinds didn't believe in. And that's why he ended up getting replaced, where they finished 2 and 3, and it became a huge comedy. Richard Pryor and everything else, again, is you took something that at this time was probably the best superhero movie ever made, bar none. And then we made it a comedy. And then we made it a worse comedy, and then Cannon got it and made it, I don't know what they made.
And they made it about an hour and a half. It was, again, that weird difference between Richard Donner, who I think is only slightly younger than Richard Lester, being the right director, and Richard Lester being the wrong one. Richard Lester was an American expatriate who lived in England and had no use for America. God bless him. He decided, I like it here. I'm going to affect a British accent from here on in. And you can smell that in Superman 2. There is a disregard for Superman. The whole thing in the end where he gets smashed into Coca-Cola signs and whatever else, Marlboro signs. Not only a product placement, but also showing disregard for American commercialism. All that's fine, but put it in another movie. This is a Superman movie, and it's truth, justice, in the American way. Hey, Mr. Lester, it's not, let's make fun of that stupid guy in the blue suit. And it's an age thing, I think, age and culture. Donner got it, and Richard Lester didn't. And in that time, the 70s into the 80s, we were dealing with mostly adults that thought comic books were stupid kid stuff. we're going to make it better. We're going to have fun with it. It's like, you know, campy stuff like Batman. It's so stupid. We're going to make a good movie out of this, or we're going to make fun of it, which was exactly the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, no, it definitely was, and to make, you know, Batman dark, I mean, I appreciated the 1960s Batman more than I appreciated, you know, the only one that kind of made it somewhat entertaining to me were the new ones with, you know, Christian Bale, where they kind of explained the armor and the suit. That was kind of cool. But even after a while, it's like, you know, and then, you know, and the other problem is everything's so commercial, is we're going to change the suit every movie because of sale of toys. We're going to change the Superman suit for sale of toys. You know, Spider-Man, every movie gets a new costume for sale of toys. Go back to the iconic suit, which they kind of did again in Civil War, where it kind of went Ditko-esque. But, you know, it's Superman, when it came out, Chris Reeve, it was the original Superman suit. Mm-hmm. And that's what you want. And that's really cool. Again, go back to basics. So, yeah, it's interesting. This is a...
Hey, Scott, 2 questions for you. We've got the distance of time here, so it's not going to hurt my feelings. But did Joe ever talk to you about those 2 idiots that he had to fire?
He said the script wasn't going where they wanted it to go. And that's where Stan's assistant got involved. As I had brought that up, he said, what's the problem with the script? He said, well, Stan doesn't like it, and this. And I said, I read it. I thought it was pretty good. But somehow I got involved in it that I didn't like it. But, you know, who the hell am I? He never had anything negative to say about you. I think that, because I'm going to tell you, the guy got a lot of comic books made and was trying to find out as much about Spider-Man as he possibly could about what he knew. He was a fan. And I would pin mark specific books, like look at this one and look at this one. There was a whole one where in the 50s, Doc Ock number, Spider-Man 53 or 54. And of course, you go to the iconic Master Planner one where he's got the weights. I mean, the whole thing he's trying to hold up. And number issue 31 or 32 or 33, one of those. You know, I always earmark those for him. These are the ones you want to look at that gives you a sense of Spidey, that gives you a sense of... it's more than just a statement, with great power comes great responsibility. It has to play. So I earmarked a lot of those, and I know that he really wanted to be part of it. And I think John pushing him aside, and again, you don't push aside the guy that he's got complete control over Canon Film Spider-Man. And the minute you do that, he's going to make some changes where, the thing is, nobody listened to him then. He would make some statements, and then they'd write a script, and the scripts literally went afterwards from bad to worse, and they were just, what in God's name are they thinking?
Apropos of such things, I'm sorry we didn't get Frank Leloggia in this. He's in Italy and he's ill. But later on, when Golan tried to revive Spider-Man under his umbrella as 21st century films, he tossed the rewrites aside and went back to essentially the first script, his polish of Marnie's rewrite of our script. And that's the one they circulated. And Frank Leloggia was hired. He was a good director, and he was our age, and he understood Spider-Man, although his Spider-Man and Peter tended to cross-dress a little more than I would have expected. At any rate, he delivered his script, and they said they liked it. This gets into this groupthink business. And he tells of getting a call from Menachem Golan on Thanksgiving morning. This is whenever, 1988, 89, or something like that. And Golan said, don't want to change a word. You come in and we'll talk about it. And Frank said, okay, great. Well, we can make it first thing Monday morning. He said, no. Today, we have to talk today. it's Thanksgiving. And so he said, okay, fine. And he went down 11 or 12 o'clock. And here's Menachem Golan with his room full of the Israeli mafia. They weren't mafia guys. They were just Golan flunkies. And they started with page one and read through the whole thing. And they all had their little input on everything. And Lelouch is going nuts. You know, this is the script that everybody loves, but they've got to comment on every line, every dialogue, every bit of dialogue. And finally, sometime mid-afternoon, one of Golan's assistants said, "I think Peter Parker should have a dog." And everybody shut up and looked at Golan, and Golan's face just turned red. And he said, "I have made pictures for 25 years. I know making pictures. You know how much cost to put dog in motion picture?" And he stood up, pointed to the ceiling. $1 million! No dog! At that point, Frank just washed his hands of it. He said, "I can't deal with these guys. They're crazy." And they, of course, found another writer, Neil Rutherford, to rewrite the thing. But that's a bunch of people who don't get it. 21st Century is trying to peddle their thing, and there were still people that wanted to buy Spider-Man. Golan did what everybody makes fun of them for doing this: pre-sales to video, pre-sales to television, pre-sales to cable, and so on. That's how things are done. People make fun of Canon. Look what they did. They sold pictures they hadn't even done yet. Well, yeah, everybody.
That's how they financed it.
Yeah. So he approached Sony Columbia, and Sony Columbia were extremely interested in it for a lot of reasons. Number one, he's coming in with not just a finished script, because he tossed away all the later rewrites, but a finished script where you've got Joe Zito's year of preparation done. Every shot was storyboarded out. There were these marvelous 12 or 15 oversized 11 by 14 charcoal illustrations of the major scenes. He had budgeted it out. It was ready to go. And Sony was interested for a lot of reasons. Number one, Spider-Man is a pretty good idea. You know, I mean, people will go see it anyway. If it's good, they might go see it 2 or 3 times. And number two, they didn't have a franchise that they could rely on. You know, they didn't have, you know, a Raiders of the Lost Ark that they could go back to the well and do a sequel to, or James Bond, as MGM-UA did. And they wanted something that they could rely on, a tentpole franchise where they could do a sequel every couple of years and know that that's going to make X number of dollars, so that'll pay for our other mistakes. So they were fascinated by it. They got into negotiations with Golan, and that's when Frank Loggia was hired to rewrite the thing. And subsequently Neil Rutherford rewrote it again. And then they had a deal in place with Columbia. Menachem Golan was going to be producer, in name only perhaps, or whatever. And then Golan was talked out of that by the guys at Carolco. And they said, you know, we have a much better idea. We're going to do the biggest Spider-Man adventure yet, and we have James Cameron, and he's going to come in and create everything and so on. And Golan threw in with them. He said, Golan's attitude was, "That's fine as long as I'm listed as producer." They said, "Oh yeah, sure. No problem." And hilarity ensued.
Yeah.
And basically, what was that? What I remember is that Carolco, they simply used the original Terminator 2 contract, which was with Cameron, which he had.
Yeah, there was the agreement that Cameron would have final say over the credits of the film.
Like he would have the right to do anything he wants.
Right, and Cameron was not thought to do a movie with Menachem Golan's name on it as a producer. So in the ads that the Carolco started putting in the trades and so on, Golan's name is nowhere. And Golan said, wait a minute. You know, I'm supposed to be listed as producer. Oh, where's my name? Oh, well, Jim says that he doesn't want your name on it. And Golan said, no, wait a minute. I've been working with this for 6 years. You know, this is my movie. No, well, no, we can't really do that because we want you. And so he sued Carolco. There were countersuits from Carolco to all the other companies that Golan had pre-sold rights to. It became a mess. And Cameron, who I'm not sure James Cameron ever wrote a word of anything. There are writers who work with him who remain mostly anonymous, and that's pretty much what I think happened with the Spider-Man thing.
I remember there was in the advertisements, which I do have with me, is that Carolco, which they released this advertisement in which there were 2 titles, of course. They had Sylvester Stallone in Rambo 4, and then it has a James Cameron film, Spider-Man, a Carolco/RCS video production, which based on the Marvel Comics character.
Yeah, some of the earlier things actually have Neil Ruttenberg's name listed as writer, which would indicate that his script was involved at any rate, which was submitted to Columbia. Actually, Columbia just sent over every script they had. Scott, I would not at all be surprised if yours was in the big pile they sent to Cameron. That's where in this transfer of stuff from Canon to 21st Century to MGM-UA to Columbia. There's like 12, 13 scripts. And as I said, there was one in there that was not a for-hire script. It was a spec script done by somebody who had nothing to do with anything. But it became listed in the transfer of material. So I would expect on the big pile of Spider-Man scripts that sat on James Cameron's desk, yours was probably in there.
It probably was. I don't know. It was, you know. I mean, if you want just out of, you know, shits and grins, I'll be happy to send you a copy if you really want to peruse it.
Sure.
I mean, we finally dug it up. My friend kept it, and that's the one that I scanned as a PDF, and I sent, Twee a copy of. So
that would be great.
Yeah. No, again, nothing to hide. It just, I was frustrated, and the thing that after you guys left that they were complaining about, number one, was the script. And so I said, well, crap, let me give it a shot.
I just from what you've described, the one page that I saw, I'm sure it would have been terrific. We would have fought you on credit, of course, but yeah.
I could have cared less on credit. I could have cared less. There were 50 people listed as writers by the time. Let's just do this sucker. That's how I was looking at it.
That actually in the end I had to bring suit against Sony Columbia, but in the end that's all I cared about. List everybody who had something to do with this. Don't say written by. Just list them in the end credits of the sequel.
Thanks too. So.
Yeah.
And I would say is that when there was always something that James Cameron could do so he got all these scripts, and he had the Joseph Goldman 89 submitted version of the Spider-Man script. So basically what he did was basically slapped his name on a new front cover and basically submitted to Carolco, and they paid him. Carolco paid him like.
Well, yeah, because according to the deal memo on Spider-Man, I know I got a copy of it. What he had to do, because they didn't trust him on budget. Imagine that. They said, what we need from you is for you to submit a script that, in our estimation, can be done for $60 million or less. Now, notice it doesn't say for you to write a script. So he submitted. He changed the top sheet, and added his name to it, and submitted the script they already had, which had been budgeted for $30 million, and just said, okay, double the figures. And at that point, it's $60 million, and he has fulfilled the elements of his agreement, and they paid him whatever it was, $1 million or $1.5 million for that, which is really, that's a good job if you can get it.
Yeah.
I basically started reading his I can put in a quotation, scriptment.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a bullshit word, it's a neologism. It's a treatment. Some of it is written in script format, where the name is center page and the
with dialogues.
Column beneath it is dialogue, but it's a treatment. The scriptment, that's so pretentious. I write things that aren't treatments. I write scriptments. You write ponderous, half-assed treatments, some of which look like a script. At any rate, so in the wake of what usually happens to all those who are listening here, what usually happens is a step-by-step thing. You agree that somebody's going to write something. They do an outline, or they do, and then you either okay or you suggest different things. They do a treatment, a short story version of the movie story, and you discuss that and make changes, and then they go to script. They do a first draft script. Everybody has their input, and they do a second draft script. That's usually the way things are created. In the case of Cameron's association with Spider-Man, there was a script first. It was somebody else's script, but he put his name on it, so now it's his script. In the wake of that, he does a ostensibly original treatment, which is of course totally all his, except that there are elements from every previous Spider-Man draft in it. And even that unauthorized that freelance script that was submitted. There's stuff from Ethan Wiley's draft that is word for word out of Ethan's deal. There's even a reference to Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis and a dream sequence and so on. Frank Lelouch's stuff, and Neil Ruttenberg's stuff, our stuff to a small extent. Cameron gets credit for coming up with the wonderful idea of organic web shooters. It's not a device. No, he's shooting it. Well, that's out of Leslie Stevens' script. So at any rate, he turns that in, probably gets another $1 million for that 30 pages. And then Carolco goes bankrupt, and Menachem Golan goes bankrupt, and James Cameron moves on to something else. It all just collapsed in a flurry of lawsuits.
And when there was like rumors that Leonardo DiCaprio was Spider-Man, and like you told me that there were a bunch of files at Carolco that there was no mention of a cast.
Yeah, I don't know if casting was ever discussed. I know that that Arnold Schwarzenegger was mooted as Dr. Octopus. I asked Schwarzenegger at a convention once, what was the deal with James Cameron asking you to do Dr. Octopus, and what he said was, I never read a script. Now, notice, he didn't say we didn't discuss it. I never read a script. Well, God, no wonder the guy became a politician. So there was obviously casting discussed with regard to Dr. Octopus. Well, I can't imagine not thinking about a star to put in it. I can't remember whether Leonardo DiCaprio was a known figure at the time. Anyway, I think this was before he became maybe he'd done Gilbert Grape by then. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, he had.
Oh, okay. Well, might as well use him. Tom Cruise is too old now. Although a 40-year-old Tom Cruise as an 18-year-old Peter Parker, I think there's something to that.
You never know.
Yeah. Hey, Liz, we'll make Liz the girl, and she can like run her fingers through his salt and pepper hair and say, does everybody in your family go prematurely gray? And he can say, I don't know. My parents were mysteriously murdered years ago. He may have been a government agent, but I'm not sure, and it's not part of the story anyway. I'm just spitballing ideas here. Well, now let me take charge here, because it's a silly, fun story, and I found myself in the middle of it. As I say, Columbia wanted a franchise, something they could rely on every couple of years, and they didn't have it. They wanted Spider-Man desperately. Well, the head of Columbia, I can't remember his name, a marvelous highfalutin producer. He produced Catch-22 ages before and so forth.
You're talking about Ian Bryce?
No. He's more of a practical guy. If I could remember, I would. But at any rate, he was.
Was it John Kelly? Was it John Kelly or no?
Yes, John Kelly.
Oh, okay.
John Kelly was intimately familiar from his years at MGM-UA, intimately familiar with the complex history of James Bond. MGM-UA and Eon Productions had to deal with the claims of Kevin McClory for years, because Kevin McClory and a writer named Jack Whittingham and Ian Fleming had essentially created what the movie James Bond character and world was going to be like in 1959. There wasn't any interest in the character in Hollywood, so McClory wanted to be a producer, who co-produced Around the World in 80 Days, hired Jack Whittingham as a writer and worked with Ian Fleming and developed a thing that would be called Thunderball, eventually. James Bond of the Secret Service, I think, was the original title. And he came up with Spectre and the bigger-than-life villains and so forth, all of the stuff that eventually became James Bond. Subsequent to that, the rights lapsed, and the two guys who started James Bond took it over. Fleming took all the material that he had worked on with McClory and Whittingham and put it in, created a novel, Thunderball. And McClory said, wait a minute, that's our story. You can't just say, big lawsuit. At any rate, out of all that, McClory kept certain rights to James Bond, including the use of the character, the use of things like Spectre, several of the secondary characters, and the idea of a nuclear blackmail scheme. And for years, he's billed as producer, Thunderball, in fact. For years, he wanted to do an alternate James Bond thing, and Eon fought him, and as did United Artists, because that was their franchise. Every couple of years, they could do a James Bond film, which would financially apologize for all the films that they did that lost money. So that's the way it was at this point when John Calley went from MGM-UA to Columbia. He knew all this stuff, so he went to the McClory estate and said, "We want to do a James Bond film. In fact, we want to do a whole James Bond series, a new one, and we want to use the McClory material." And then you've got people back at MGM-UA just shitting bricks. They're sitting on the rights to Spider-Man at the time, but they don't have a dime. They can't afford to do anything. And now some rival studio is going to start a James Bond series, and who knows, undercut them entirely, make a TV series out of it. Their enterprise, their 20-year history with James Bond is going to evaporate. So there's a big flurry of accusations and suggestions and all this stuff. What came out of it was a mutual deal where Sony would get the full rights to Spider-Man. They thought they had the rights from Marvel. They thought maybe they had the rights from Carolco. But MGM said, no, we own the rights because we bought Canada. And MGM got all the rights to everything James Bond on the one hand, so they were safe. And Sony got all the rights in a nice little package from everyone who had a claim to Spider-Man. So everybody was happy. I happened to be working at MGM a little bit after that in film vaulting and discovery and everything. And we had a company picnic day, and I happened to be sitting across from the executive who was in charge of all this, and he just laughed. He said, "We didn't have a dime. We could never have made Spider-Man." That was all a bluff. But it was a bluff that paid off, because Sony Columbia then consolidated all the rights to Spider-Man. And at such time as they did, they optioned all previous scripts from the Leslie Stevens thing onward, and exercised their option on only two elements out of that, what was called collectively the Cameron material. That is, the one script with 6 names on it, 2 of which were James Cameron, one of which was mine, and one of which was Johns, and one of which was Barney Cohen, and the other was a misspelling of Menachem Golan's pen name,
Cool, Mark.
and the Cameron treatment. So their announcement was we're going to do Spider-Man based on the material by James Cameron, which is already, not just an exaggeration. It's not right to lie, but that's the way it was. And that's when they hired David Koepp, and they handed him Cameron's treatment and said, "Okay, make a script out of this." And he did very often, word for word, that's what his assignment was. And then they asked him to redo it. It was Goblin. It was the Electro guy. And God bless Koepp. He's certainly, he's made a lot of money doing what he's doing. It smells to me like he didn't give a crap about Spider-Man either. It's certainly in the second draft where they eliminated this Electro guy and the Sandman guy, and substitute Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus. That script is written to me like somebody who is sick and tired of this mess, who's doing this kid stuff when he wants to do important films, and you've got guys, somebody Dr. Octopus falls off a building, and he goes, "Ah!" Yeah, and it'll be spelled out for about 3 lines. But he was the fair-haired boy at Columbia, and he got paid a whole lot of money for that too. One person who's never mentioned is Sam Raimi's brother, who I understand did a polish and/or on-set revisions and so on. I can't remember his name. He's got a 2-line bit in the J. Jonah Jameson scene where he pops in occasionally.
Ted Raimi.
But they hired Scotty Rosenberg, who had done Con Air and so forth. And according to our conversation, there were things in the movie that were his. I wouldn't be at all surprised because there were a lot of divergences in the film certainly from the Koepp scripts. And then finally, the producer, Laura Ziskin, was lucky enough to get Alvin Sargent to do a final polish on it. He said that all I did was do a couple of things on the scenes between the boy and the girl. She was a marvelous writer, the turning point and things like that. She was lucky to get him because she was married to him, and he pocketed about $500,000 for 2 weeks' work. He was lucky to get that too. Sam Raimi is as big a fan as we are, and that he fought for it. I know that he met with Stan very early on in all this saga, after Darkman came out, because Darkman is essentially a Marvel comic. And he sat down and told Stan, "I want to do Spider-Man." And I'm sure Stan's, now they don't listen to me. But he was apparently he knew what he was doing, and I think caught maybe 85-90% of the right tone in there. Other than that stupid CGI stuff.